Thanks very much. I think we have to switch the... So thanks for everyone for coming. And Jarlath is always a tough act to follow. But I think this will... he really set the groundwork for some of the types of analyses that could be done in the future. And so Jarlath covered the urban tree canopy assessment, the basics of the land cover mapping, and how that can be integrated with other data at a variety of different scales to support decision-making about preservation and conservation and new planting initiatives. I'm going to talk about, so that's what we have and what we could have. What I'm going to talk about is maybe what we want to have, or how to prioritize different places for planting additional trees. And so our prioritization approach has been developed in several other cities. I've been working with Mike and Jarlath for about 10 years now on similar projects throughout the US. And basically our overall premise for prioritization, of which there are many different approaches, ours is very simple. Trees provide benefits. As Jarlath mentioned before, we talked about wildlife and mitigating urban heat island, absorbing stormwater. So we recognize that trees provide a suite of benefits or ecosystem services. So then we identify data sets that show where those benefits are lacking. So where is it hot? That would help us find where to mitigate urban heat island. You could look at impervious surface maps for flooding. And so we try to identify data sets that are indicative of where the known studied benefits of trees are lacking to help us prioritize places to plant new trees. There are a number of benefits of trees, and so we have to decide which of those benefits and co-benefits we want to manage for, because there are, of course, trade-offs. So iteratively, with Edith's team at Tree People and with Michelle's team at Cures, we decided to focus in on 3 elements: urban heat island mitigation, public health, and socioeconomic status, looking at some of those environmental injustice situations. And so we decided to prioritize at the census tract level. So that's groups of block groups. And the reason we did that is because that ties strategically to the Cal EnviroScreen data, which Jarlath mentioned is an important data set that helps us identify environmental justice areas and also links to funding opportunities. And it's really a data set looking at environmental hazards, exposure, and vulnerability to those hazards. So poor air quality, heat island, and things like that. So we focused on heat island mitigation, public health, socioeconomic status, using the Cal EnviroScreen boundaries, again, to strategically link to the investments in existing data sets. So heat island, public health, and socioeconomic status. How do we operationalize those measures to prioritize places to plant trees? So within each of those 3 areas, we have these sub-indicators or metrics that were used to develop those. Maximum surface temperature is an indicator of acute heat stress, so really high temperature events, whereas a mean temperature is more indicative of chronic heat stress. So both of these 2 elements, acute and chronic, are important parts of urban heat island. And so we want to include both of them when we're considering heat island mapping. The dependency ratio is often used in public health as a measure of vulnerability, and I'll explain that in a little bit more detail. But the idea is to look at those who are most vulnerable to different public health indicators. And then looking at socioeconomic status, trying to address environmental injustice, and looking at the percentage of the non-white population, and then median household income, which we flip. So higher income is lower priority. So building off the previous presentation, we've seen those citywide numbers mask a lot of variation by socioeconomic status and the distribution of tree canopy, by home ownership and by home value. And so we need to look at high priority in lower income communities. So I'm going to show a series of maps, and on all these maps, on your left is the raw data summarized up to the census tract level, and on the right is the standardized. So of those 5 indicators I've just shown, temperature is measured in degrees, the dependency ratio is a unitless ratio, income is measured in dollars, and percent non-white is in percent. So we need to standardize that. These are all measured in different ways, and so We use a method called z-scores, which I can explain in greater detail if anyone is interested in some boring mathematics. So we have the maximum surface temperature on your left, and again, we see a lot of the geographic diversity we saw in the previous presentation where there's different ecosystem types. The coastal area is cooler, and so then we see the standardized version on the right. So again, the previous slide was maximum surface temperature indicative of extreme heat or acute heat events. And on this slide, we show the mean. So these are the chronic heat conditions where trees can play an important role in mitigating that urban heat island. Again, the standardized version on the right. And because I know Los Angeles loves its cars, I've included the freeways for a little bit of orientation. So the dependency ratio is an important measure of vulnerability to different types of public health. And so we take the young population, the 15 and younger, those who are dependent, right, on adults, and the older population, 65 and older, who might also be dependent on others for healthcare, divided by the group in the middle. And so the World Health Organization uses this. This is used a lot in several public health studies. And the World Bank uses this to look at labor force participation. It's a very common metric of the distribution of ages within a population. So again, we see the dependency ratio and its geographic distribution on the left and the standardized version on the right. Moving to the socioeconomic status indicators, we see the percentage of the non-white population on the left in percentage form and standardized on the right. And finally, looking at the distribution of median household income, again, higher income, lower priority, especially based on the UTC assessment that shows the distribution of tree canopy by home ownership. And this is a sub-indicator for socioeconomic status. So if you roll these 5 maps together, the heat island maps, the dependency ratio, and the socioeconomic status indicators, you get the map shown here on the right. And to zoom in, again, I know LA loves the freeways, but for additional clarity, I'll remove those labels. This is the final prioritization that we arrived at with the team at Tree People and the team at Cures. So there's many ways to prioritize trees. This is one way. This can be broken up by different geographic areas, municipalities. You can zoom in and focus. All these data are made available through this project. You could go back later and say, no, I actually want to penalize high income more. You could tweak that weight. If you wanted to bring in more data from the Cal Enviro screen to better link to funding priorities and risks of environmental hazards, you could weight and rank those if you wanted. So it's a flexible way to begin prioritizing places to plant trees. And as was mentioned earlier, this is not the finish line, but really the starting for additional efforts. That's all I really had to go through. So I'll take a few questions. Eric? I'll paraphrase your question.
I'm wondering if you looked at it just maybe informally when I looked very quickly at when I looked quickly at where the prioritization came out, it looked like the 110 and 710 corridors were important focal points, and those have also historically been areas of the highest air pollution and some of the most vulnerable people in public settings. You know, we tend to put schools and things like that where the youngest people with the highest rates of development, are located. And I wonder if you might comment on that, or just leave that up for a little bit, because it takes a while to absorb it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great observation. And actually, if someone wanted to do an analysis of schools and further answer that kind of question, these data are analysis ready for exactly that type of inquiry. So thanks for highlighting that.
Hi, Jonathan Parfrey, Climate Resolve. I'm noticing that Rancho Palos Verdes is a high priority where some of the urban core isn't. it's kind of a curious result. And is there a possibility of adding Cal Fire's severe fire predictions to do an analysis as well?
Yeah, so I'll take the second question first. Integrating with fire vulnerability was beyond the scope of this project, but very well could be integrated. And in terms of some of the high priority areas that maybe you would think are not high priority areas, as was mentioned before, there's a lot of ecological diversity in such a large study area, and some of those arid areas are naturally hotter and would not have trees. So that can be, because it's ranked, you could mask out any areas you wanted, and to better tailor this ranking to meet other programmatic needs is very easy to do so.
We can take one more question if anyone has one. Okay.
How about an easy one from Jarlath's kids? I'm just kidding.